listening to the Power of Inspiration and Awakening Radio with Julia Griffin. To master a higher frequency for a new state of mind. Once you walked in a forest of splendor in which everything you did and everything you thought was aligned. It is possible at this time to begin to return to the old knowledge. Intuitive healer and manifester Julia Griffin is here to talk about this unique time in history when all sentient beings, animals, plants, trees, and the earth are intent on creating this change. The wolves awakened her to the most incredible light, which opened gifts and brought knowledge that she longs to share. You are creators, and you are born to be creators of beauty, possibility, and joy. Join Julia on a journey into a beautiful and magical world where amazing possibilities exist. Let us help open the door. The Power of Inspiration and Awakening with Julia Griffin starts right now.
Hello, everyone. I'm Julia Griffin, and you're listening to The Power of Inspiration and Awakening on Transformation Talk Radio. Stay with us for the next hour and let us help you experience a new state of mind and a higher state of being. I'm very excited about today's guest, Rebecca Wildbear. She's written a wonderful book, Wild Yoga, and we're going to talk about nature and the earth. But first, let me tell you about Rebecca. She helps people deepen their connection with themselves and the earth so they can perceive and relate to animals, plants, mountains, and rivers as conscious beings, which they are. She invites people to awaken to the wisdom of their bodies, listen to the mysteries within their dreams, and discover their soul's purpose. Since our wellness and our planet are linked, she makes the journey of our souls with an active listening to the earth for what she needs. Rebecca encourages people to engage with the sacred through their bodies and listen to the mystery within, because that's where the answers are. She created Wild Yoga to align us with the earth and soul and to enhance our capacity to listen to our bodies, dreams, and nature, to guide us into becoming healthy and vital members of the earth community. Since 2007, she's guided wild yoga programs, and for many years she worked as a yoga teacher. You can find Rebecca at RebeccaWildbear.com, and I'm so glad to have you here today. Thank you so much, Rebecca.
Thank you. Thanks for your work in the world, and so glad to be able to connect.
Well, it's a wonderful synchronicity because I saw my real medical doctor yesterday, and I was asking her if certain therapies I had read about would work, and she said it's different for everybody. She said that's why it's so hard to be a holistic doctor. She said once everyone could go walk around, and instead of having sprayed chemical grass, there were herbs and plants that would speak to you and you would know what to take. And in my last class that I taught last week, we were talking about the importance of dreams and how we dream up our lives. And for anyone who knows me, the earth is super important to me. So I'm thrilled about the conversation. So today we're talking about one of my favorite and most beloved subjects. If you've read my newsletter, the opening is always about nature. And that's connecting to the earth spiritually and physically for growth on many levels. So tell us a little bit about that, just a brief introduction, Rebecca.
Yeah, well, to me, the earth, our relationship with the earth is vitally connected to our health. We are connected to the earth, even when we are in the city or in a building and we don't know it or don't feel the connection. I mean, we're made up of the same elements and molecules, and we're animals too, even though we live a little bit more separate than all the other animals. And so there's something in us, in our DNA, in our organs, in our cells that just wants to return to the earth. I mean, there's all sorts of even therapies now, like earthing, and just about the contact of your bare body, your bare feet on the earth. You know, the closer we are, the more we can align with the rhythms.
And I'm going to say, for people who have back problems, sometimes just not wearing shoes as often as possible can heal your back. Something that I was thinking about, and I had it later on in our conversation, but I'll go ahead and say it, When I was reading your book, I was thinking about how many people have always lived in a city and have no idea what it feels like to spend day after day in nature. If you haven't done it, then you don't know, and you should discover that the birds and the trees start to talk to you, particularly if you're lost. Um, your body begins to change how it moves if you stay in the woods for more than 3 or 4 hours, and you can't help it. Your body starts to pick up the rhythm of what's around you.
Mhm. Yeah, we become like those around us. So when we're around concrete buildings and automobiles, we start to take on the mentality or shape of those things. And when we're in nature, we can become more like the shape of those ones.
Which are
And
fluid.
yeah, and I also think of nature as, humans, we get caught in all these roles about like who we're supposed to be and how we're supposed to act. There's all these edits, like I can't be this, I can't be that, I got to do this, I got to do this. And in nature, a tree is a tree and a bird is a bird and the river is the river and the mountain is the mountain. And so when we go out there, we're surrounded by beings who are authentically themselves and deeply in conversation with everything else. And so it's a way that we can find that rhythm of ourselves too
And
in
I
all those
believe all
places.
those things are always talking. I know when I was about 8, I was lost in a swamp, which is a pretty dangerous place to be where I grew up because there are alligators and snakes. And I thought, I'll never get home. And I sat there and it was like I got the clearest message. Just take the next step in the right direction. And I thought, where is that? And I heard the earth say, you can feel it. And there were like lines of energy that you could literally follow. And I believe that that self that we encounter in the woods is the real self, because that kind of knowledge can only come from your heart.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yep.
So one of the things I'm fascinated about is how many different things you pull together in this book. You've got dreams, you've got totem animals, you've got mountains, you've got rivers, you've got woods, you have philosophy and myths. It's amazing amount of material that's woven together. Now, I'll be the first person to say they all go together very beautifully. But what inspired you to write that?
Well, I guess in part it is all the things that I have found worked for me in the journey.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, too often, I think sometimes we say this one thing is just the thing, and then there's this loss because we can get really into that one thing, but not see that actually it's like all of these practices that really deepen us. And of course, there might be ones that are our favorites or that we're really good at, but they're all significant. And so I wanted to bring not just depth, but also a breadth to the areas, and that in bringing them together, we could see how they're all related.
Well, I'm a bit curious. How did you bring yoga into your experience of the wild, or was that something that happened naturally for you?
Well, it happened a bit naturally in that, well, one, I've always been attracted to the wild, and I work in the wilds my whole life as a wilderness guide, a soul guide, a nature guide. And when I went to study yoga, I chose a place. I went to Costa Rica because it was an outdoor place. I could be in nature while I was doing yoga. That made sense to me. And then ultimately, I went back and worked there where I studied. And I also worked at other eco lodges nearby. And so then I was teaching yoga teachers and teaching yoga classes outdoors. And I started to notice how nature was in the conversation with us, how doing it there was different because I also did it in classrooms when I was
Right.
back in the US. So I started to learn from the experience of being out there in nature and doing it and noticing what a difference it was.
Yeah, I took yoga in this old building. There was this fabulous oak that was probably 150 years old, and no one could get tree pose. And I remember looking outside at the tree and thinking about how deeply its roots went down, and then it was easy to do the pose. Like the tree grounded me would be a better way of saying it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the original poses are named after wild animals, places, and beings. So, in a way, sometimes I encourage people to make up their own poses too in their own yoga. And I like how you tapped into the imagination of the roots of the tree, because a big part of wild yoga is also not only stretching our bodies, but stretching our imaginations too.
Yeah, and the tree actually held me, but then after that, it was easy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because all those things have real spirits that come in and guide us. I think anyway. And I think most people miss out on that. You know, I really encourage people to at least walk every day for a half hour. And I think sometimes I don't think they're seeing what I see, you know, or hearing what I hear.
Mhm.
So waking up to that, to me, is one of the most important things that we can do. I loved what you said that, let's see, nature can inspire our movements, align us with our instincts, initiate us into living our soul's purpose, and guide us in tending the well-being of all life. It's such a beautiful quote. How did you come up with that? I was curious.
Well, I'm not sure how that particular sentence came, but when I work with people, a lot of times we're in the wilderness, so we're having conversations with nature, we're doing body or other yoga experiences, and then we're also listening to our dreams. And I've also been a participant or one on my own, just in nature, doing those things with myself. And I've noticed how they interweave, how the conversations that we have with nature affect our dreams, and how our dreams affect the conversation, and how there's kind of a dream happening in our body all the time, a waking dream of whatever experience is going on with it that we can try to track.
Yeah, because I know that that's one of the things spiritually is right now. You and I are dreaming each other up and we're talking about all this, but we're sharing a dream as we do it. It's
Mhm.
real, but it's a dream. And I don't think most people ever realize that, or realize that there's a way to go deeper into the illusion and make it into something magnificent.
Mhm.
Because if we're creating it, it is to some degree like illusion, like a real night dream, but there's a truth in it too.
Yeah, I always say that the dream happens when we're asleep and when we're awake.
Mhm.
And in some ways, it's easier to track the dream when we're asleep because our mind is turned off. So it's like
Right.
clearly the dream, 100% dream, no mind. And in waking life, our minds are trying to manage things, control things, get
Mhm.
things done, maneuver. And at the edge and on the side of all that, the dream is happening. And so
Right.
sometimes it's like, can we really turn and look at it and see it?
So this is just sort of popping out. When you're doing all this work with people, do you feel like it's changing the future dream of the earth?
Well, that's my hope. You know, it's not only personal transformation and healing, but planetary transformation and healing. That culturally, the humans have gone off the trajectory, that the dominant culture is not in alignment with honoring living really sustainably with the earth. Even its sustainable plans aren't sustainable. And so, how do we come back to not only individually, but also collectively living in a way that's honoring and close to the earth, and
Well,
therefore dreaming of a livable future?
I will say that there's something that the wolves told me, and that was that whenever I saw something wrong, to correct it. So if I see them cutting down old growth trees, I see them coming back up really fast. When I think about the whales, I see the ocean clean and a lot of the boats gone. I just try to correct everything that I see and then hold a really beautiful vision of it, because I think that at a really deep level, if there were enough of us who were truly awake and we moved into a state of love and we projected that the earth would help us create it, if that makes sense.
I like that vision.
Because the wolves were always saying correct things. I had a huge herb garden when I was living with them, and I thought, all I do is pull up weeds. And they immediately said, see less weeds. Because anything that irritates you, you create more of. Because our society is more negatively based than positively based. And so even though it didn't happen immediately, I started telling myself, every time I go out here, there are less weeds. And in a month or two, it was true. And so I think that's one way that we can dream up our reality a little more differently. Another thing I would say is that all animals are sentient beings, whether people recognize that or not. And now I have my German Shepherd licking my hand for saying that.
Yeah, I agree. It's the natural world, all the animals, even the rocks and the trees. That it's an animate world. Everything is alive and calling us to be in conversation. And in my opinion, I see them as more intelligent than humans. And I know
Me too.
that's crazy, but
No. It's
according
my
to most
preferred world.
literature.
And my friend who raised wolves said to me one time, she said, Well, wolves are a lot smarter than most people. That's probably why they don't belong with most people. She said, I think you got to be above 120 IQ level to have one, to even catch on to how smart they are. And I
Yeah.
think she was right.
Hmm.
Because we don't use our intelligence in a natural way. And your body changes when you stay outside, and it changes in a good and wonderful way, and that affects your soul. One of the points you made, and we'll circle back to where we are now, is that the patriarchal society in 500 years completely obliterated every indigenous, and those are all maternal societies, in about 500 years. And if you look at nature, whales, elephant, wolves, they're all matriarchal.
Yeah. Buffalo. Yeah.
Mhm.
There's it's fascinating to see. And sometimes there was a myth that, just because it's physically stronger means that it would be in charge. And that's not true. The
Yeah,
male buffalo are physically stronger than the female, but they still defer to the female for
right.
direction and guidance and caring for the young. So
Because I remember when I had a son, I thought if women were in charge, there would never be any war. Because if you loved your child, you would never send them into that.
yeah, there's a lot going on in the world. It's hard to attune to the culture, what happens to children and women and other marginalized peoples. It's like it's hard um, to see that, and the earth being, I think, the biggest destructions enacted upon because it has zero voice. It has not even a little bit. It's not even recognized as an alive and sentient animate being. It's just a commodity.
I
So
know, because I've said before when I was riding in a car with friends, that tree looks so happy, and they'll say, how do you know? Because the vibration. I mean, what else? Another thing that I would add to this, and maybe it's far out for some people, but I can hear what animals say, like in the same way that you and I are having a conversation. And the alpha female and a matriarch carries all the stories back to the beginning of time. And they're verbal, to say a wolf or a buffalo or a whale. There are sounds that carry those stories. And they're taught those stories, and they're taught to love and help humans. And anything that can hit a sonic tone is constantly singing the song of creation and hoping that we align with it. So if you're listening and you want to do something, imagine you're hearing that song before you go to sleep at night.
great, I love that.
Well, you felt it. I'm just drawing it into your consciousness. I
Hmm.
knew that before I said it.
Hmm. Yeah, the symphony
Yeah,
of
the
the.
symphony.
Hmm.
And there's a different one for every season with many animals, and they make things grow or they make things change. And it's such a rich world.
Hmm. Yeah.
And I see sometimes people just sitting there and watching TV all day, and they think, oh my God. I'm not condemning streaming, because sometimes I do it too, but I'm just saying, please don't make that your world.
Hmm. Yeah, it's the natural world was made to relax us and comfort us and connect with us and is naturally soothing, but sometimes there's all these other things people have adapted themselves to feel comforted by.
One thing that struck me about your book was the vulnerability. You're very vulnerable when you started having all of your spiritual and natural experiences, weren't you?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a natural vulnerability. They say sometimes if you're wanting to have a great conversation with the world about, your purpose or learning about the others, that making something happen comes from being vulnerable and vulnerably offering ourselves in the conversation.
I think that it does, because for whatever reason, probably during a 10 or 15-year period of awakening, every time I thought things were together, they would crash and then come back together in a different way. And I met the wolves during that time. And when I went through one of the hardest, let's just call it a tower card, um, hardest incidents of the tower, that was when I began to really hear them on a much deeper level and realize how complex all this information is. And for anyone who's really ever gotten involved with animals or nature, you're going to realize that so much of it ties into indigenous mythology. It's like, and it finds you. You don't even have to go read it. A book will fall and it will be yours, or someone will give it to you. And you start to see that what they're telling us goes back to the beginning of time.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so, I mean, if we're going to create a new life and a beautiful future, don't we need to know that?
Well, it's great that you've connected to the wolves like you have, and
Well,
have.
I was always terrified of them. I had a dream about a spirit wolf, and I met real wolves on the full moon 2 weeks later, and I could hear them the way we're talking. And another year later, I had a wolf, and I've lived with several wolves. And I think that there are different kinds of wolves, some that want to be with humans and some that don't. But my wolves were kind enough and tame enough so they could sleep with my children when they were small.
Mm-hmm.
But that also brings me to ferocity, because anytime anyone was either verbally mean to me or I felt physically threatened, they became completely ferocious. I mean, almost to the point that they frightened me. Although they never bit anyone or did anything, you just plain didn't want to look at them. So I wondered if you would address some of the part about that, of being fierce.
Yeah. Yeah, I think in my book I call it feral female ferocity. And I
That's
do
it.
that. Yeah, I do that because, in our culture, there's a lot of like aggression that's shown that it is harmful. And so people sometimes say, well, all aggression is harmful, or, all ferocity is harmful. But that's not true, because, ferocity is one of those protective energies that helps us take care of, what we love and what we honor, ourselves, our boundaries, as well as other people, other beings that we love. And, by saying that ferocity isn't allowed except for by certain people with guns or who are put in charge of the culture, that's what kind of creates the destruction. Everyone else has to just be nice and not say anything, and then the people in charge can be, aggressive in all the ways that benefit the culture.
And I think that's really a misnomer with empaths, because most of them were taught as children to be nice and not say anything. So they have a really hard time getting into their power and using it in a righteous way, in my opinion.
Yeah, I've just been studying a bit about trauma too recently, and a trauma response is not to, as children, is not to show aggression, because you will lose the attachment to your caregivers.
Mm-hmm.
And so you just tolerate whatever's going on, and you stuff your aggressive impulses into the shadow. And then
Right.
sometimes they can come out in, bad ways because they've been stuffed in the shadow for so long.
Right.
But there's a healthy aggression that protects and stands up for needs of yourself and others in the world. And feral female ferocity is a call back to that. Like, hey, like there's this energy we're missing, and we need it. We need it to help the world.
We also
We
need it
need
not to be afraid.
it. Mm-hmm.
I think one thing that I teach is, when you can, be forceful, but be neutral and speak from the heart. We're not getting even with anyone or saying anything back. We're just not allowing it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if it comes from the heart, it's usually strong enough so that people feel it and want to get away from it, which is good.
Mm-hmm.
Just like the wolves when they first stood up or they showed their teeth, you just want to get away from it.
Mm-hmm. They say no, or here's the boundaries, here's where the edge
Yeah.
is. You say, okay.
Yeah. Nothing happens. We're just drawing a line.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think it's really important. And if we want to go a little deeper, part of that is because you protect your children. I don't know of any good mothers that, if their child is in danger or something's not wrong, you forget completely about yourself. You're just not going to let that happen.
Mm-hmm.
And that is an instinct.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
those are all important things that people forget about in their effort to become civilized.
Yeah, and it's kind of a misnomer, because people sometimes say, "Oh gosh, I'm feeling angry, so something is wrong, like I'm out of balance or I'm not healthy."
Right.
And oftentimes when I'm working with people, I'm like, well, actually, maybe that's your body and your heart communicating something that's really vital. And maybe that emotion is there just for as part of your health.
Well, the thing about it is that we haven't learned a good way of expressing it or a safe way of expressing it. And you go like, well, I'm a good person, so I'm not going to express this. I'm not going to feel this way. Instead of figuring out what's the way I can communicate and push back that it evokes a change. It's just being angry. I have a bad temper. I don't want to break anything else. I'm tired of that. I want to communicate really well. Or draw lines, and it's fine. Just don't cross the line.
Yeah, I think ferocity doesn't have to be acting out necessarily. It can just be like a no,
I
or
agree.
like just it can be something very subtle, but it's like a standing strong, like rooted and in place. Like, this
And
is
you've got to get through the emotion before you get to just standing strong.
It's true. Sometimes
You can't pretend to yourself that you're not angry or you're not upset, because then things like your head will hurt or your stomach will hurt, and you'll go around saying, "What's the matter with me?" Well,
yeah, you have to take the time to listen to the anger, not necessarily spout out at everybody else about it, but just listen to it yourself and find out what is the core of this? What's really going on?
what do I
What do I
really want to say?
Exactly.
And that's
Yeah.
a lot of work.
And sometimes too, it's not even about what we say. It's like something I need to do or change, like
Right.
not this anymore, not have these relationships. I need to stand over
Or it's a
here.
pattern coming back up and you're furious because it's back up.
Mm-hmm.
Why does this keep happening to me? I always say it's at least 10% you. It may not mostly be you, but some part of you is involved in it.
It's true. Yeah. We're wired, we have experiences when we're young in the culture and our bodies get wired for certain things. And when other things happen again in life that remind us of those things, we get, it's like hard to
Right.
sit with it because we had to when we were a child. And so it's important to check that out and say, oh, wow, look at this.
Well, that's another reason that what you're teaching is so important, is because that discovery of how nature works and the energy that comes in and how your body and your mind change from yoga. Someone asked me once, they said, but you could do weights, you could do aerobics, you could do this. And I said, I'm not going to leave yoga out because of the feeling that comes with it. Nothing else has ever given me that feeling. And so if you're working on how your body feels, along with finding out about your emotions, that's really a big gain right now.
Yeah, they're so connected. The body, what's happening physiologically in us and our emotions are very connected.
Yeah. And so, I mean, it all comes together. Then we're back to, if you're really emotional, go sit with the trees or go garden for a half an hour. You'll be amazed at how you feel, particularly if you take off your shoes. And those are just all things that can change. And go sit with trees for 15 minutes. You'll be so surprised. I don't think it's that way right now because the people have changed, but I have a park that I walk in with my dog every morning, and there are not a lot of people, just mostly a lake and trees. And I thought one time, every single person I know about part of their life because they've told me on a day when they were particularly happy or they felt particularly connected with nature. And what a nice way to know people that I'll never really know anything about. That openness to the world. So if people wanted to do one thing based on what we've talked about or what you're teaching, what would you say that should be?
Well, one thing is hard with all the things that I have. For me, I suppose the one thing is nature, and it's exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah, the
To
great
get
healer.
outside, leave your phones and your music behind, and try to empty your mind and be present with the beauty of the world around you, and engage. Maybe start by just speaking out loud about the beauty that you notice and see. or
Or
maybe
think the
bring,
flowers.
bring your biggest questions to nature. Yeah,
Yeah.
and not expecting an answer, but just trying to introduce yourself at the deepest level you can, not by who you know yourself to be, but by who you're by your questions.
We'll get into this a little more deeply when we come back in just a second. But one thing that I forgot to say, and I should have said it, is that if you're working on a vision, a dream vision, a desire, a manifestation, people are not aware that nature actually helps build it. I had one year that I was working on something, and there were 2 fig bushes in the house outside of the house I was renting. And all of a sudden, I noticed that the one that I focused on when I was meditating was 2 or 3 times bigger than the other one. And I thought, oh, that means my manifestation is coming to life. Nature is showing me, she's helping me with that. And that was such an interesting thought. So for all of you who want to create a whole lot, try doing it outside. And so now we need to go ahead and go to break. I'm Julia Griffin at One True Self, and I've been talking to Rebecca Wildbear at RebeccaWildbear.com. We're talking about the importance of nature, particularly combined with spirituality, yoga, and the many changes that are going on in the world. So stay tuned and we'll be right back. Welcome back. I'm Julia Griffin at OneTrueSelf.com. And I'm talking with Rebecca Wildbear about her yoga practice, her relationship with the earth. And we're going to talk about longings and yearnings and a little bit about manifestation and probably a little bit about mythology. So let's start. Rebecca, first of all, why don't you tell them where they can find you and a little bit about what you do?
Well, you can find me at RebeccaWildbear.com. I guide wild yoga programs along with my book. And I guide online programs and in-person programs. I have one coming up called Feral Female Ferocity, where we're going to focus on that topic we just spoke about. I have another coming up in Vermont this September, and one in Costa Rica in January.
And they can email you or find us on your website, I presume.
Yep, exactly. I'm also on all the social media channels too, most of them, so you can probably find me there as well.
That's great. So you have a section on the muse and courting our longings. And one of the first things when I could really understand what the wolves were saying pretty accurately was that everyone has secrets hidden in their heart about what they want. And when we act on them, we become more of who we really are, who we truly are, because we're acting on the impulse that the universe gave to us. But I would love to hear about your interpretation and what you feel about longings and dreams and desires.
Yeah, well, one of the chapters in my book, chapter 7, which is romancing the mystery of what you love. I mean, I think there's a thread actually that starts in chapter 3, which is kind of flowing in your heart waters. So it's kind of inviting you to be in your heart, which, as you know, can be challenging in this culture where we're taught to not be in our heart. It's very unsafe to feel what we feel, to really love, to really care. But what if we can just really feel the truth of what's in our heart? It's hard to be in our hearts if we're not willing to be with whatever feelings might show up there, which is one of the scary things about being there. And then that's in chapter 3. And then chapter 7 moves us to following the mystery of what we love. Actually, chapter 8. Chapter 8 is following the mystery of what you
have
love.
a thread that goes all the way through it.
Yeah. And so that is about the heart again, but it's about different. It's like what you're talking about, longing and love. It's like falling in love. It's like, what do we really fall in love with? If we're in our hearts, can we, what is it we're really falling in love with? And it might not be a human. I know we're taught that it's supposed to be this opposite gendered human. And, but you know, you can fall in love with wolves, or you can fall in love with trees. You can fall
Or
in
a
love
garden.
What'd you say?
A garden.
A garden. Yeah.
Yeah.
A particular natural place. You could say I've been pretty in love with Costa Rica, where I've spent a lot of winters, and pretty in love with this Southwest Colorado where desert and mountain meet. You know, you can fall in love with particular landscapes You can fall in love with particular activities. I've fallen in love with soul guiding and dream working and raft guiding and teaching yoga and writing. So there can be, and there's different moments at which each one of those things was like the love that I was really into. And that's what it took to kind of learn it really well. So we can fall in love, and being true to our heart is kind of being true to what is it we really love, and can we follow that longing? And longing sometimes too, I'll just say, we don't always know what we're longing for. Sometimes we can feel longing or yearning and we can't quite put it into words, but it can still be important to try to follow it as best we can, whether it's just a feeling, a color, an impulse, a place to wander, and keep listening for more clues to emerge.
Or just be open enough to be surprised, like I was. I didn't know I was going to fall in love with herbs and dig up the entire yard and have a big herb garden. I had no idea.
Mm-hmm.
If you had asked me about either one, I would have said no, but I was meditating a whole lot then in working on my chakras and working on my heart chakra, and I really wanted to wake up. And that was how it happened for me. But if you say you want to awaken or you want to open your heart, I think you have to be open to the experience that the universe brings and be willing to be surprised.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
To
Yep.
step out of character. I mean, you write a lot about going down rivers, and I've paddled down enough of them to know sometimes they're exactly the way they look, and other times you had really better pay a lot of attention and do it right.
Yeah, rivers have a way of keeping you on their toes. I think that's one reason I fell in love with them. We fall in love with things that usually make us grow beyond what we thought we could. They ask things of us. Well, you mentioned rivers, like raft guiding and having to learn the currents and the safety pieces of being on rivers and how they communicate and can surprise you was
And
important.
how the water talks before something happens, or how it sounds when it's going to stay the same. Yeah. But those become directives. I mean, just like if you spend a lot of time in the woods, the sound of the insects and the birds and the trees all change if you're not in a safe place. They're trying to tell you.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so it's really quite fascinating with that. And so how do you get people to move into their dreams or their heart's desires? Let's go longings and then we'll go into dreams.
Yeah, I think it's there's a bit of a story I share in chapter 8, following the mystery of what you love, about longing and working with somebody on a conversation we have, feeling into the mystery of how can you feel what it is you really long for. But really it's, I suppose, just a series of questions and directing people back to their bodies, encouraging them to have certain wanders and ways of continuing to check in. Following our longing isn't this thing we do once and then check it off the list. It's kind of more like a way of being, because what our heart might be longing for in one moment, it might be quite different from what it was before.
And it's an evolution as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I mean, it's like right now I'm not living with wolves, but who knows what might happen next year.
And then, I write about in chapter 14, courting the muse, and that's really related to following the mystery of what we love too, because ultimately our longing takes us to our artistry, like the particular way that we have of seeing the world or offering ourselves to the world. So that's a continuing thread of following our longings lead to our soul gifts.
And I think people sometimes are afraid they're going to leave important parts of themselves behind. And I want to be honest and say, you do leave parts of your ego and your personality, and sometimes even things you love behind. But the adventure, the outcome, what you experience is so much more profound than it would be if you kept the old life.
Mm-hmm. It's true. Yeah, we have to, our lives are full and busy. So letting go and dying to certain things is part of the journey too. It's like, if we can't have it all, there's only so much time and space. So certain things have to be let go of in order to be able to say yes to other things.
So you have a really good process in there. I guess people could ask, what is it that I really love that I don't know about yet? That would be a good question to get there.
Oh, that's a great question. And I love how you said be prepared to be surprised. Because we all know when we ask questions, the mind will leap in and try to answer them all. and then we're not really going deep into the deep imagination and into our hearts and our bodies. We're just, our mind is just kind of figuring it out for us, but we want to drop below that. So if it's kind of like your mind is just coming up with known answers, you might just say, thank you very much, mind, for trying so hard, and then drop back in and just wait for the surprise.
Yeah, because it's always going to be a surprise. It's never going to be what you expected. I mean, I was thrilled to hear animals and I wanted a lot more, but when a lot more came, I was surprised by that too, and what the information was and where it took me. So you just never know if you're honest about it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because we can't know it's a part of the universe we haven't explored yet, or a part of our inner universe we haven't explored yet.
Mm-hmm.
I think later on you might remember past lives and you might understand how you ended up there. And here's a great example as you and I are talking, and probably we both have had past lifetimes where we were priestesses or we took care of trees. And there are lots of people out there who are doing that. And I was thinking as I was writing the questions and going back over the book and thinking what I wanted to talk about, probably if all of you who had that in a past life would wake up and focus with us, we might save the world really quickly or get it into a great place.
Yeah, there's that's that quote about fearing our power much less than our darkness.
Mm-hmm.
To
Yeah.
align with these relationships, earth, body, soul, muse, and our own gifts, gives us a tremendous amount of power.
I mean, this group of people have probably spent hundreds of years perfecting their gifts with it, and they just have to tune into it now. The people that I'm talking about. So tell me a little bit more about dreams, because you have some unique ways of getting people to tap in that I thought were really beautiful.
Well, I see dreams a lot like, and maybe you do too, a lot like wilderness, like the psychic wilderness of the night world. And so I'm not so much about like trying to figure it out or analyze it or critique it or dissect it even, and more about inviting people to step into the mystery of it and allow the dream to do its work on us, by being in it. Lots of times I ask the question, what does the dream maker want us to experience? I wonder why the dream maker would give me this experience or want me to experience this. And I'm looking at all sorts of things. It can be healing and holding kinds of dreams. It can be going into the past or going into the future or potential possible futures. It can be ancestral, or dreaming of people we've lost. It can be soul or mythic, telling us something about the gifts that were here. It can be shadow work, pulling parts of ourselves, reclaiming parts of ourselves from the shadow,
But it's
recovering
all
powerful gifts.
important.
It's all important. I think of dreams a lot like if Goddess could speak to you every night in your dreams, and she does, and give you personal guidance, would you listen? Because that's kind of what happens in our dreams. Only it's mysterious guidance. It's not easy to just, oh, okay, I got this dream, so that means this. We have to kind of hang out with it and let it work on us, and sometimes even get the support of another person to help us in listening to the dream.
Or look up the symbols that are associated. But I remember a long time ago, about 15 years ago, I wrote an article about the secret chamber of the heart, which is behind the regular heart chakra. And so anyway, I was supposed to interview people about it, and it ended up that no one really knew what I was talking about. And I realized it, and I thought, I couldn't know that if I weren't going there. Interesting. And so anyway, I wrote all the information and what everyone had said and my own interpretation. And as soon as I finished, someone who hadn't returned my call when I was collecting all that information, and he wanted to remain anonymous, he said, I called you back because I could feel that the secret space behind your heart was open. And so we talked about it. And at the end, I said, is there anything that you would tell my readers? And he said, yes, it has to stay a mystery. If it weren't a mystery, we would never find it.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be that the not knowing leads you there.
Yeah, I kind of encourage people to write their own dream dictionaries, that the symbols and meanings that they find in dreams are unique. to them sometimes and can't be discerned by anybody else but them having their own conversation with those dream beings.
I think there's good information on what it is generally, but if it doesn't fit when you look at it, then it's not related to your dream. You're going to have to go into it another layer. I mean, another one was one time was like looking right after I was divorced, I was super vulnerable, kind of falling apart. But I had a dream and I cut my hair off about here that my hair was like all the way down to my elbow. And I thought, well, that dream just felt great. And I was working at a library, so I pulled out a volume on Jung and I said, what, the meaning of or symbology of hair, and it said power. And I thought, oh, my power is coming back. But that was a feminine, wonderful way of feeling it, because if you have long hair and you cut it, you always regret it. So that was just one of those interesting things. Sometimes they will take you there completely, and other times it doesn't matter how much you look it up. You're the only person who can figure it out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there's always a mystery in nature. It can't be otherwise. So I wanted to ask you to tell me a little bit about myth and how that plays into your book. You wrote that so beautifully, the parts about myth in there.
Well, myth is often related to our soul, the mystery that we're here to live. So a lot of times when we're doing all these things like tracking our dreams, listening to our conversations in nature, seeing what arises in our body, we're also tracking the mystery inside us as it's coming through us, which is also related to the mythic story that we're here to live, which can come via an image, can come via story, can come via body sensations, certain words or names. So, if we're living mythically, that can help us. That's also another way of having power and connection in the world to these other parts and living more of what we're here to live rather than getting caught in the smaller stories that's so easy to get caught in, but staying tuned into the real purpose of why we're here.
I'm going to add a tip on small stories because I'm like everybody, I get stuck in them. I won't let myself discuss them with anyone until it's been 2 weeks. And then after the 2 weeks, I'm like, why did I even want to tell anybody? I don't even care anymore. Or I figured out what to do about it or whatever. So that's a really practical tool to not get caught in small stories, because if no one wants to listen to them, it's not that much fun to play them around and around.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a big, I guess that's my discovery of the last 2 or 3 months, is as soon as I have a small story, I'm like, yes, and you can't pick up the phone. Like, okay, won't pick up the phone or tell anyone. And so that's a funny thing. Some things wear out, but tell us what living mythically is. Give us some more on that, because that's fascinating.
Yeah, like I think I write about in my book, my name on my first that I got on my first quest was Braveheart. That's after spending 3 days on solo listening for some clue when I was 30. That's what I got. And there's so much to that. It's not that simple, but the first start of it was thawing my heart, and opening myself to what I really felt. And then being brave. I had a vision when I got that name of all the moments flashed in front of me when I had been brave, and then moments flashed in front of me when I hadn't.
Mm-hmm.
And I could just feel that this was like really where I was supposed to be, and the heartbreak of the other moments. And then I still was not sure, it's easy to be like, I'm not sure about this. But I woke up in the middle of the night crying and writing poetry after I had that experience many nights. And then finally I took a vow and did a ceremony to do my best to live Braveheart into the world and to understand what that was. And then 6 years after doing that, there was more, which is when I got the name Wild Love Prayer. And there's already ways I'd gotten that name through other experiences, but it hadn't gotten put together as much as it did for me on I think it was the third quest that I did. And so then it's living more of that into the world and so on. There's more pieces of my soul that have come to since then. I've been on the journey for like 20 years, and soul never stops talking and giving you more. And the thing is, like, it's not like saying, oh gosh, I'm so great, I'm a brave heart, or I'm a wild love prayer. It's like saying, this is what the mystery has shown me that I am. It's like kind of getting mirrored by the earth, like, this is who you are at the deepest level. So now, like, I can't not do it like before. I can't not try to be that. It would hurt too much. But it's very humbling because, you know, I could do certain jobs and tasks and feel really proficient and like at the top of my game. But oftentimes what soul asks is the hardest thing for our personalities to do. And
Yeah.
so it really grows us. And it, you know, remembering the myth is not, again, not to say, oh, I'm all that, but more to say, gosh, this is really what I'm called to be. And by remembering the myth, I can remember what I'm really here to be and keep reminding myself, oh, this is what really matters. This is how I need to approach these situations. Forget the other stories or identities. Focus on this one.
Because often those quests that you have or the mythology that you have has to do with some part of yourself that's not developed yet. And that's hard.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's taking you into being brave enough to develop that.
It's true. Yeah, and it feels like the more I get asked by soul, the more that gets asked because everything builds on the other, you know. And there are things that it's asked. And I mean, it's easier when I look back and I'm like, wow, over the last 20 years, look who soul has grown me into. Who would have thought? That's amazing. But then when I look ahead and I feel the longing, because the longing is connected to soul. I long to live my soul into the world. I long to be who my muse sees me and wants me to be. But sometimes the longing is so painful because I can still feel how I fall short of those
Right.
things and how much time it will take potentially if I ever get there.
And
But
how much you have to give up sometimes in the meanwhile to get there. Because a lot of the time it's the things that are on your plate that are your favorite things are the ones that go to get there.
Yep, it's true.
But you
Yeah.
get something better later.
Yeah, there's the mystery loves space, especially to create. To create, the muse needs space, and so when we're full of other things, there's not much space for that.
Which is why for a lot of us, when we awaken, there's kind of a crash and burn and rebuild period. But in that crash and burn, because I know some people are going through that right now, there's this vulnerability that the universe loves because you can actually hear it because you're not filled up with anything but yourself. And that's when some really big and amazing changes occur. And that, I guess we've just done the hero's journey. I mean, we've pretty much gone through the steps.
And the hero's journey is one of the journeys too, which is kind of often to gather our resources and get stronger. And there's also the adult hero's journey, which is about getting dismembered and put together by something greater than ourselves. That's the one I connect more with, the soul's journey.
Let me think. Yeah, I get what you're saying. We have to repiece ourselves. I mean, we kind of don't know when we're going through it, what we're keeping and what we're losing. But in the end, it's all beautiful and better, I can tell you that. So we're coming near the end. So it was wonderful having you, Rebecca. Please tell our listeners your website again.
Please tell the listeners what?
Your website again.
Oh, it's RebeccaWildbear.com.
Okay.
So please feel free to reach out if you want to continue the conversation. Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Julia, for having me and inviting me and reading my book and sharing it with all your listeners. I'm really grateful.
It was so much fun, and thank you for going so deep. I love that. So everyone who's listening, if you want to find me, I'm at onetrueself.com, onetrueself.com. Sign up for my biweekly newsletter. I write about astrology, I write about nature, and quick trips to develop on a spiritual level and higher vibrations. You can also write to me at onetrueself@gmail.com. So everyone take care and namaste.
Thank you for listening to the Power of Inspiration and Awakening Radio with Julia Griffin to master a higher frequency for a new state of mind. Join us next time as Julia takes us deeper into the memory of the moments of light where transcendence and enlightenment emerge. The memory of the jewel of consciousness has always lived within you. To tap into waves of energy and create huge changes by imagining the beauty of the vision and desires that are hidden in the heart. Learn to find your way back to nature, beauty, and your own heart, which holds the secrets of your existence and future. To discover more about Julia's adventures, animal communication, and the teachings she brings to every show, visit onetrueself.com. That's onetrueself.com. That's ONE, trueself.com.